There is a detail about reality that almost no one notices while trying to change their life. Most people believe that things need to change first on the outside in order to start believing. But the real process almost always happens the opposite way. Before an opportunity appears, before a new path opens, before any concrete transformation happens, something changes silently inside your mind. Suddenly, certain ideas start to make more sense. Situations that once seemed impossible start to feel merely distant. And opportunities you would never have noticed begin to call your attention. This is not just positive thinking. It is a shift in perception. It is as if your mind is being prepared to recognize a reality that it simply could not see before. And that is exactly why many important changes begin almost invisibly. First, the way you see life changes, and only then, life begins to respond differently. The perception is the first point of alignment. Before any external change happens, something very specific begins to reorganize. The way you interpret reality itself. Situations that once looked like blocks begin to look like temporary challenges. Paths that seemed closed begin to reveal small possibilities. And the curious thing is that, at that moment, often nothing has changed externally. What changed was the lens through which you observe the world. It is like when you learn a new word and suddenly start seeing it everywhere. The word was always there, but your mind was not yet prepared to recognize it. With opportunities, the exact same thing happens. When your perception begins to adjust, you start noticing details that previously never entered your field of attention. A simple conversation can bring a new idea. An unexpected situation can reveal a different path. A small decision can open a direction that once seemed invisible. And this is the first sign that something has already started to move. Maybe not yet in the external world, but in the way you interpret and respond to life. And when this perception changes, something even more powerful begins to happen. Your attention begins to reorganize naturally. Mental focus repositions your vibrational direction. What you observe more frequently ends up gaining more space in your experience. This happens because focus works like a kind of lens that directs your mental energy. When someone spends a lot of time focusing on limitations, the mind gets used to searching for proof of those limitations. But when perception begins to change, focus changes as well. Suddenly, the mind starts paying attention to different things, new possibilities, new ideas, new ways to solve old situations. And something very interesting begins to happen. The same circumstances that once seemed static begin to show small points of movement. An opportunity that once went unnoticed catches your attention. A solution that once seemed distant begins to look possible. This happens because the universe responds to sustained focus. When your mind begins to observe new directions with more consistency, reality begins to reorganize circumstances compatible with that focus. And it is at this point that many people begin to feel something different internally, a type of feeling that appears even before any result shows up. It is the moment when the feeling begins to confirm that something has already changed inside you. And it is exactly at this point that something even more interesting begins to happen. When perception changes and focus begins to reposition itself, a very specific internal signal appears. A feeling that arises before any external evidence. The feeling confirms the new internal reality. Many people think that feeling comes after the result. First it happens, then they feel confident. First the opportunity appears, then they relax. But in most deep changes, the opposite happens. The feeling changes first, and it is not exaggerated euphoria. It is not that momentary excitement that lasts only a few hours. It is something much more subtle, a sense that things are organizing themselves, even if you still cannot explain exactly how. And there is a practical detail that makes a big difference here, something that is almost never taught when people talk about the law of attraction. Instead of trying to feel artificial enthusiasm all the time, observe how you react in the small situations of your day. For example, when something small goes wrong in your day, a delay, a negative response, a plan that changes. In that moment, there are two possible responses. The first is to interpret it as proof that nothing is working. The second is to think something simple like, this is just part of the path. Something is still organizing. It may seem like a small difference, but this type of interpretation completely changes the emotional field you sustain. Another very powerful exercise is to pay attention to a specific moment of the day. The first minutes of the morning. Before picking up your phone or entering the accelerated rhythm of tasks, ask yourself a simple question. What kind of reality do I want to start noticing today? Not as a distant goal, but as a lens of observation. Maybe you decide to pay more attention to opportunities, maybe to solutions, maybe to interesting people who appear in your path. This small adjustment changes the way your brain filters the world throughout the day. And when you begin to train this conscious perception, something curious happens. Life begins to seem different. Situations that once went unnoticed begin to draw attention. Ideas appear more easily. Small coincidences begin to appear more frequently. Now let me invite you to something quick. If while listening to this you realize that the way you think about your own life has already started to adjust a little, take this moment to follow the channel, because content like this works almost like a constant mental reminder. It helps you keep this type of perception active in your daily life. And that makes all the difference when it comes to transforming perception into reality. And when this feeling begins to stabilize, something even more important happens. Your mind stops oscillating so much between doubt and expectation, and begins to enter a much more coherent state. Internal alignment happens before manifestation. External reality almost never changes instantly. First, something deeper happens. The internal state stabilizes. The change in perception helps you abandon old interpretations that kept the previous reality active. Before, any small obstacle seemed to confirm that nothing would work. Now, the same situation can be seen simply as part of a larger process. And when thought, feeling, and intention begin pointing in the same direction, something very powerful emerges. Internal coherence. The mind thinks about possibilities. The feeling begins to accept those possibilities, and the intention remains clear even without immediate results. It is exactly this coherence that allows external reality to begin following along. Because when your internal state stops sending contradictory signals, life encounters far less resistance to reorganize itself around you. And it is at this point that something even more practical begins to happen. Without realizing it, you begin to act differently. And these small actions, and which seem simple, are often exactly what allows the new reality to finally begin to materialize. And when this internal alignment begins to stabilize, something very practical begins to happen in real life. It is not something mystical, nor something dramatic. It is simply a natural shift in the way you move. Inspired action arises naturally. When perception changes, you no longer need to force yourself to act all the time. The mind begins to perceive more clearly what truly makes sense to do. Ideas arise in simple moments. Decisions that once seemed difficult become more obvious. And small actions begin to create unexpected movements. Often they are not big changes. It may be something simple like starting a conversation you once would have avoided, exploring an idea that seemed too small, or making a decision you had been postponing. But that is exactly how many changes begin. One person decides to learn something new and it opens an unexpected connection. Another decides to share an idea and someone becomes interested. Another simply changes the way they respond to an opportunity. These actions may seem small, but when they come from a state of alignment, they carry direction. And direction changes results much more than excessive effort. At this point, many people begin to notice something curious. Not everything depends on doing more. Part of the process depends on something that few people truly develop. Allowing. The openness to receive becomes stronger. There is a detail that often goes unnoticed. Many people know how to desire new things, but internally, they still believe that those things may not be possible for them. This small doubt creates resistance. Even when an opportunity appears, the person may hesitate. Even when something good happens, they may doubt it. But when perception begins to expand, this resistance decreases. The mind begins to accept a simple idea. Maybe different things really can happen. And this completely changes the way you respond to life. You become more open to new experiences, more willing to talk to different people, more attentive to paths you once ignored. This openness creates internal space, and when internal space exists, reality finds much more ease in bringing new experiences, sometimes through an unexpected conversation, sometimes through an opportunity that appears almost by chance, sometimes through a path you would never have rationally planned. And when this begins to happen, the most important point of this entire process appears. Because it is not only about noticing something new once, it is about being able to maintain this new way of seeing life long enough for it to become your new reality. And it is exactly here that many people consolidate the change that began at the start, almost imperceptibly. Because noticing something new once is easy. The real turning point happens when this new perception becomes constant. Maintaining the new perception sustains the new reality. Reality begins to reflect what you are able to sustain internally. If the new way of seeing life appears only for a few moments, it may create small changes, but it does not become a new pattern. Now, when this perception begins to become part of the way you think every day, something very interesting happens. Your mind begins to interpret the world in a different way. Situations that once would have been seen as blocks begin to be seen as adjustments. Challenges stop looking like signs of failure and begin to look like part of the path. This completely changes the field of experiences you create, because the way you interpret each situation determines how you react to it, and your reaction determines which path opens next. Imagine two people living a very similar situation. One interprets an obstacle as proof that nothing works for them. The other interprets the same obstacle as a sign that they need to adjust the route. Externally, both started at the same point. But in a short time, their realities begin to separate completely. Not because the universe chose to favor one of them, but because the perception each one sustains begins to generate different decisions, different attitudes, and different paths. And this is the point that transforms perception into reality. When you maintain a new way of seeing life long enough, it stops being just an idea. It becomes the lens through which you live, and when this lens changes, the world you experience begins to change as well. That is why many important transformations seem to happen almost silently in the beginning. First, the way you think changes, then the way you feel changes, then the way you react to situations changes. And when these three elements begin to move together, external reality simply begins to follow. Now that all of this begins to make sense, an even deeper realization appears that few people truly understand. Reality does not change just because you desire something different. It begins to change when the way you participate in your own life changes. When your perception adjusts, your focus repositions, your feeling stabilizes, and your actions begin to reflect this new state. You stop reacting to the old reality, and you begin creating space for a new reality to appear. That is why many transformations seem to happen gradually, almost silently. First you notice things you did not notice before. Then you begin to think differently. Then you react to situations with more clarity. And when you realize it, some circumstances of your life are no longer the same. A conversation leads to an opportunity. A small decision changes an entire direction. An unexpected encounter opens a path that once seemed impossible. From the outside, it may look like coincidence, but those living through this process notice something very clear. The change did not begin outside. It began in the moment when the mind started to see the world in a different way. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of everything we discussed here. The universe does not change your reality first. It changes your perception. Because when your perception changes, your choices change. When your choices change, your paths change. And when your paths change, your reality inevitably begins to follow. Now observe something calmly. In recent times, has the way you see certain things in your life already begun to change a little? Because many times that is exactly the sign that something has already started to reorganize, even before it clearly appears in the external world.